Great. Hello. Welcome to Quantified
Hey, Cam.
Software. Today, my guest is Pru. He has a long history of both engineering and product management. So with that, I'll give it over to you to do a little bit of an intro of sort of the different environments you've been in, the roles you've been in, and kind of the different trajectories of those teams.
Right. Hey, Cam. Thanks. I'm quite excited to be here on your show. And yeah, so my name is Pruthvi, or Pru for short. And I'm the founder of a dev tool security startup called Needle.sh. And it's at an early stage. And to give you a context, so I'm an engineer by education, did computer science, information technology degree, worked for a couple of years as a software developer, and mostly in big IT consulting companies like Deloitte and IBM, and then did my MBA, and post that have been working in mainly product management roles across consumer and enterprise, B2B SaaS, etc. Right. So my experience working in engineering comes, of course, working as an engineer, and then as a product manager working with engineering teams of different sizes. And I've done, this is my second startup, and in both the startups I've kind of been the head of engineering, right, kind of spearheading the entire taking on the CTO role, so to speak. So that's yeah, that's kind of my experience. And in the team sizes have, in the bigger IT consulting, obviously there are like hundreds of people on projects, but then I tended to be like more junior employee then. And in product management, then I think across the different products, it's been right from being employee number one, and then the other founders who were the engineering team essentially, to engineering teams of 50, and then again 20, 30, and then right now I'm kind of the heading the engineering in my own startup. So it's been all over the place, but yeah.
Okay, I think this is why it's going to be a fascinating conversation, seeing from day zero in an organization and on a product through to that large, IT consulting where you have hundreds of people, like you said, on the team. So I think it's going to be a fascinating to pick your brain here. So when you're in these different products or in these different stages, maybe we should break it down into the kind of the smaller stage, middle, and then maybe we can deal with massive at the end. Is how do you decide what the next thing is to build, what the next priority feature or piece of functionality that you want to build is?
Right. So I mean, I'll look at this question as a product manager and as someone who's is supposed to be in charge of the backlog, right? The entire product roadmap and the product backlog. So ideally there should be a backlog which has been formed after discussions with multiple stakeholders, and that can be right with the CEO or the founders or the any kind of leadership team, and your business teams, which would be your sales team, who obviously are the main customer facing team, the marketing team, who would have an idea of how they want to kind of position their product, and the other teams, customer facing teams like support teams and customer success teams. So after conversations with these, and of course engineering team, in terms of what they want to see in the product, what kind of technical debt there is, what are the systems they want to build over time for achieving the product goals. So this product roadmap over time will kind of get built, and you start from there in terms of when you come down to, let's say, whatever release or sprint you have into what to build. At that time, as a product manager, you're supposed to kind of come up with the main focus of what you want to do over the next 6 months, next quarter, next few weeks, and right now, right? And you come up with a broad list, and then it becomes a conversation with the engineering team mainly into what we can build, right?
Yeah, so
and
I
these
think
are probably the candidates.
You well described the what I would call the kind of the best practice suggestion of
Right.
Oh yes, I know that I should have a backlog and it should be well groomed, and like
Right.
I think everybody that I've worked with, good intentioned people know that that's what they want to get to. But it seems oftentimes that in the face of reality, that's not actually what happens. So have you seen, what are the kind of the spectrums of like how well that's been done you've seen? Like has it always been exactly like best practice, or how has it deviated?
Yes, so it does tend to deviate, at least in the teams I've worked in. It maybe 50% is according to plan or what the larger plan is. and it can even be higher depending on where you are. But how it can deviate is that something is a major technical issue comes up, and the engineering team kind of has to spend the entire sprint just looking at that, or at the last minute someone, even though as a product manager you should be driving the conversations, like maybe the sales team, some major customer, right, who's driving maybe 5% of your revenue, just comes up with something completely unexpected, and then you have to do this to kind of keep them happy. And so those are the ways it can change. I think, and those are the two main ways I would see. I think anything breaking smaller would just come under those buckets.
Have you seen organizations have good ways of talking about the trade-offs between those different types of demands? Because it's usually not just one of those coming in a sprint. You might have all three of those coming in a sprint, right? You might have the sales team saying they need a feature for some critical customer, the technical team saying we have some serious problem in the system that we need to resolve. If it's not now, like who knows, it might fail at any time. And you might have the marketing team saying, well, we need to start, we need this feature to start ramping up our push for Black Friday or whatever the, insert, important marketing deadline. So have you seen good ways of trading these things off or talking about these features in ways that?
Right. So ideally there should be one, right. Ideally there should be one metric. So let's say when doing B2B SaaS, I think sometimes it tends to be easier because let's say you are tracking mostly around revenue or MRR, or right. And then there needs to be a framework for taking all of these requests and actually putting them into the potential MRR you see of each of these actions, right? Either the growth in MRR or you're trying to retain it so that, if we do this, then, net negative MRR because this big customer who's paying us hundreds of, or thousands of dollars per month goes away. I think many teams tend to have that one metric because they are trying to, there has been a larger one, the company mostly knows what that larger metric is. Second, there are usually themes, at least in well-run teams. Into this quarter, we are focusing on this particular thing, which is, let's say, retention, which again drives MRR ultimately, right? Mm-hmm. What becomes more difficult is how do you take something fuzzy, like if you don't build it, then this server might go down, and then what happens? Or the marketing team saying that, oh, this is the campaign that's really going to help us achieve our goals. And then that's just much harder to characterize, right? And then it becomes about maybe who's the better communicator, who's able to convince whom of ideas, or maybe there's a larger negotiation going place in, like, hey, you said you do this next quarter, stuff like that. So I think the problem really comes in, do you really have a formula for every request and how that impacts the metric that you're tracking?
Interesting. And then you've seen that actually implemented at some of the companies you had, and that felt like it worked well. It wasn't just, oh, well, since this is a tangible customer that we could lose, or this is a tangible customer deal we could make, so we will prioritize on that versus these longer tail, like you said, the marketing or the technology risk.
Right. So at least in my previous company, the CEO himself was very numbers driven, right? And so he would have ideally liked to have, I think the team there of discussion would have ideally liked to have how every feature and enhancement impacts our metric, which is revenue. Mm-hmm. And so there are advantages to that in the sense that it makes the conversation simpler, because then you can just say, oh, this is my formula of how this request kind of goes there.
And you just use the Excel spreadsheet and you hit sort on that, and then there's your priority.
Absolutely. It's all done. The problem then can be, other problems can come out of it, because then people can be like, hey, gaming the formula a little bit. We know this is what happened. Like this, that's what the customer said. He's going to sign that contract if this happens. And this is guaranteed, 15K revenue or whatever it is out of this deal. So that's always fuzzier. And I think sometimes behaviorally what problem it can create is when it's measured so closely and watched so closely, I think people will start refraining from proposing ideas which are slightly out there, which could potentially have higher upside because they're not sure about how to make the case for how does this one feature or this campaign really impacts the revenue.
That's great lead into my next question, which is, so that framework you described seems very clear on like how to do these trade-offs between the different, how did you think about those longer tail, higher variance? Oh, if we spend a week or two, we might be able to re-architect and fundamentally change our cost structure, or we may be able to measure our sales funnel better that could change our conversion rates, or, you know, these kind of longer term, more speculative projects that, like you say, could have massive payoffs to the business. How did you reason about getting those longer term, higher risk projects into that weekly sprint and off against well known projects?
So as much as possible, if you're an organization like that, which likes to measure stuff just so that the conversation can, conversations can be, or decisions can be quicker, it helps to have some data, if not from your own experience or your own team's experience or product's experience, from other things you have seen work at other places, right? So there is some data that, hey, this is not completely out of the blue idea, right? It has, so you try to get some data either from your own experience or from some other kind of comparative things that you have seen out there, right? And the second is, I think you just, no matter how data driven an organization is, you kind of have to also be good at storytelling. This is what they also say about, let's say, on analyst calls, where some of the, I like to listen to some analyst calls, and some of the companies which are good at this, they also have anecdotes ready. Oh, we heard this customer, and it's qualitative data, and they really like this one feature, and although we can't measure it. So I think a storytelling aspect is always there. And as a product person, I think you have to be good at that storytelling aspect. I think any team member which wants to make their case has to be good at the storytelling aspect.
Interesting. Okay. So I really like that example with the CEO that was very numbers driven and wanted to relate everything back to MRR. I'm guessing that at some point that same CEO was asking how to measure the teams that were working, and were they doing well? Were they producing well? Like, were there individual contributors that were doing better than other contributors? So, maybe not off at the individual level, but a little bit more at the team level. How have you seen examples, good examples of measuring teams and their productivity, their throughput, and across they could be comparable across teams? Have you seen good measures of that, good systems for that?
Across teams, I'm not sure. But a way to measure this, and I think in many organizations, would be the review process or the OKR or whatever you call it in your organization, and with whatever frequency you might have. So let's say in most organizations, it was, let's say, every 6 months. And there, in this particular setup, there was definitely a process there were leading indicators and lagging indicators. And okay, for the engineering team, this is how we measure everyone's performance, because then comparing, I think, different team members becomes easier. There also, to then someone making the case, like usually the manager of the team is there in those conversations, making the case to the entire review panel, right? That, okay, so these are the numbers, but these numbers probably don't tell the whole story. And those numbers those formulas are constantly revised. Those frameworks are constantly revised, because let's say, how do you, a clear example would be, in an organization, a team like the sales team, from what I have seen, usually has the clearest framework, because, how much revenue did you bring in? And that's it. The conversation kind of stops there. And maybe
what's
after
the number on the contract that got signed last week? Like,
exactly. So you can have, attributable revenue, and the second can be, let's say, marketing, because how many leads did you bring in? But then it gets fuzzier when it gets to the design team. At that time, everyone is kind of, has a formula, but then they're looking at each other. What was the impact of this particular visual designer, and or rather the work of this particular visual designer in a quarter? That I think becomes harder and harder to kind of track.
So it sounds like you haven't seen metrics that in your next company, maybe not needle .sh, but maybe the one after we can talk hypothetically. Are there particular metrics or measures that you would want to implement from day one? Is there something you would want to make sure you are tracking?
I think now that I'm building the product and I'm in an engineering role again, I think what I would like to track is I have become more and more interested, maybe because I'm doing something in security in developer tools, become more and more interested in observability and what's really happening with the systems. So instead of doing, and I don't know if this is the right approach and whether some engineering teams will not like it, is instead of spending too much time doing like test-driven development and this and that, I would say if you're moving fast, it's better to do stuff, use your judgment, and then put in observability so you know immediately if something goes wrong, right? And so you can kind of fix it. And so my focus would be on more tracking stuff like how reliable is it and how fast is it and how secure is it. If I take the 3 indicators for software, the reliability, security, and performance, then like that would be kind of the goal for building software. But across teams measuring, like I have not thought about that as much.
Well, let's dig in there. I think this is an interesting trade-off. So you're saying that in your current context, you would be more interested on shrinking your lead time or your cycle time so that features could be shipped more quickly into production. As long as you could keep your mean time to repair low. I think you're saying visibility, as I understand.
I would put a focus on visibility more rather than, oh, we have to build this, but we can't build this until we have completely scalable. Oh, we can't until there is a failover database, and like, you know, which is what I think engineering teams like to say, premature optimization. Rather than doing that, I would rather have more visibility. Because what happens with this is that you get a sense that, oh, it's everything. If you take, let's say, instead of taking, and this is just pulling numbers out of thin air, instead of taking a week to plan a feature, or rather 2 weeks to plan a feature, you say that, oh, you're just going to take 3 days or 4 days to plan a feature and just build it. If you take 2 weeks, I think then that team might go into a mindset that, you know, everything's been taken care of, and then they might not focus on observability as much. Whereas the other team would be, you know what, we'll fix it if the problem ever happens, but we will make sure that we are alerted or we get to know as soon as something goes wrong. So I think that's probably a better mindset to have.
Interesting. So the observability to you is both the alerting and the monitoring in production to know if ever this edge case happens, we need to know about it right away so we can jump on it too.
Right.
That's an interesting trade-off. I like that. Sort of adjacent to what you were just saying, you know, maybe ship something in 3 days, 4 days versus the 2 weeks and forego those hypothetical what ifs, building to support, oh, but what if the database fails over? Leads easily into a conversation that seems to happen on every software project around technical debt. So how have you seen companies manage that inventory, either have a system for logging it or tracking it or discussing it, languaging around it? How have you seen people address the problem that seems to come up of technical debt?
I think here I'm probably not the right person, because I'm much more, if you see from a technical point of view, although I've coded and I code quite a bit, my role in the last many years has mainly been product manager. And second, as a technical role, it's been early on. So if there's technical debt, I usually see it. I know that, oh, that thing has been written poorly, or, you know, that's a problem. That thing is slow. So it's not, I haven't seen, to answer your question, I haven't seen that many organized, how teams actually organize technical debt. And I don't think I've seen it in larger, like in the last, last few of my roles. I don't think, and they were large, I think at one point it was like a 60 people engineering team. I don't think there was an organized way to, you know, talk about technical debt.
Mm-hmm. You must have had a conversation though with the engineers of, oh, we can't do that project because, oh, we need to work on technical debt, or that must have come up in these.
Oh, absolutely. Right. And so is there are you saying, how do you deal with that conversation?
Or in that conversation, what was your perception as a product manager of either the words that were being used by the engineering teams or the trade-offs they were asking you to make? What was their, oftentimes when I've been in that conversation, I hear a lot of emotion from the person expressing that there's a high amount of debt. And I hear them expressing frustration that maybe they're doing things in a way that they know that there is a better way to do it. But oftentimes the resolution seems to not align with the business in some way. And so they're not able to advocate for the change that they want. And so I'm intrigued from, somebody who's usually getting the pitch from the engineering team, hey, we should focus on this because. So what have you heard in those conversations, or what do you perceive?
I do agree that sometimes some teams tend to be quite passionate about solving technical debt, and that can be one of those things where the product team and engineering teams usually clash, and there is friction there. Because I mean, if you look at incentives or how each, and for me, that's a huge thing for inside an organizations, why things happen is to how each person is judged and how they look at their career and how they are tracked inside the organization.
Yeah.
A product manager is supposed to deliver on a particular roadmap and really on particular business metrics. The roadmaps is just the way to achieve those business metrics. The idea of taking 2 sprints off to work on this hypothetical technical debt, which might then hypothetically, in the worst case, and depending on the passion of the engineer, can bring the entire thing down, that can cause friction. But I haven't seen things saying where there will be metrics thrown around. Oh, if we do a microservices approach, and that is one of the more maligned ones, right? If we do a whole microservices based approach, then suddenly if we just do it for the next 3 months, and after 3 months, our numbers, our velocity will just go up. But I mean, how do you know that that those 3 months is just going to be 3 months? Because I've never seen these projects really only take 3 months. So yeah, I'm not sure. I'm just giving you my thoughts on
absolutely. That's what this is about. So why is estimation so hard in software? You just mentioned that if, this projection of 3 months, or you have some roadmap of here's what we're going to deliver in 3 months, 6 months, it's sort of the same problem, whether it's the engineer saying, oh, if we refactor to microservices in the next 3 months, or some product manager saying, hey, I'm going to get you these, A/B tracking and this feature funnel stuff in 3 months. Like, why is it so hard to predict what's going to happen in software? It seems like nobody can do it.
Right. One would be, I think, is everyone really putting it down into, the amount of work that is really needed? So let's say for a feature, these are, I have specs ranging from extremely detailed to extremely sparse, right? And my opinion on how detailed a product requirement document can be honestly changes from scenario to scenario. But if you really had to come up with an estimation, sometimes the time taken to estimate might be more than the feature itself. Like, okay, we have to do this, then we need these APIs, and then this API needs to be done there. And then, so I don't think anyone is thinking through that complexity, or it's just takes too much time to think through the complexity. This is what I've seen now that I think this is triggering a memory. The sprint planning, right? That happens, like, it just happens in like massive features that companies have been, or product managers or your CEO has been talking for months, literally gets planned in like, well, oh, it's in the next sprint. So we'll of course discuss it before the next sprint. And then, oh, this guy is not available, or this person is not available. And so let's discuss that. And it's like 2 hours, and like a thing that you have been dreaming about or everyone has been planning for so long. Literally it comes down to, let's do this meeting. And then they obviously, because everyone needs context, right? You can't just throw a feature at them and expect the engineering team to immediately turn around. But then they're also working on their current sprint, because the sprints never stop. There is at most like 1 or 2 days between the sprints. So if you look at it, how much time is really being taken to plan different things out and to estimate it? It's, I think, laughably small. And is there a solution there? I don't know, because no one wants to stop, right? Everyone is, I mean, if you look at sprints are wall to wall. Everyone is in their current sprint while they're planning the next sprint. So when do they stop, and can they take 5 days to plan? And like, so I'm not sure what the solution there is. And I think that is one. Second is, I mean, it's just that we're not good at planning. And the second problem could be is that a lot of unexpected stuff, right, keeps happening in every sprint. There will be some unexpected stuff. Either something goes down which has to be addressed, a production issue which has to be addressed, or some last minute task gets thrown in. And so, right, that is okay. That is something you can understand, because you can never predict that's the whole definition of last minute things. You can't really predict them. But the first part is probably can be solved or can be better. Like, how long would this microservices project take?
And if you were setting up that design, if you were designing the software development process, the planning process, the sprint process, where do you feel like is a good set point right now, given your experiences as far as, cycle times on different items? When would you plan things? How small of items? How would you do estimation? What's your template, like best practice?
Right. So
plan?
I fall on the, so when it starts with the spec, right? It starts with the PRD, the product requirement document, or the spec, or whatever you call it. I am actually on the, in favor of not going too detailed on the spec. One is because I think product managers should just generally focus on outward facing or customer facing or business facing stuff, and leave the engineering details to the engineering team. Second, it also gives them flexibility on the implementation and how they can do it. So I'm not in big favor of going into extremely detailed, because sometimes then people propose that if you wanted to make this whole thing very predictable, the PRDs or the specs should be extremely detailed. And I'm not in favor of that. I don't think it helps anyone. I don't think the PMs, the controlling PMs maybe like it, but a lot of PMs will be like, no, we would rather spend time on other stuff. And the engineering teams also, if they are self-sufficient and like some flexibility, they will not like it. So then it comes down to the whole process of, and we had a pretty active, agile kind of process in the previous organization, but still, I think that was not enough in terms of the time given, because you now need to transfer this entire spec from your mind, from the document, to the engineering team, where they need to get a complete understanding, and then they need to break it down into the stuff, and then probably a QA needs to come in, and he needs to break it down to all the edge cases that no one has thought about, right? And so that stuff itself can take over a couple of, let's say 1 or 2 weeks, because then you have to kind of block time on everyone's calendar to do it, which means that you should have great visibility into the roadmap, at least a couple of sprints ahead. And I think that's where sometimes the fuzziness comes in, because I know as a product manager, I would like to buy some time, because I'm waiting on some conversation from the sales team to know whether I should prioritize this or not. And so, yeah, I think more time and a better process on maybe even multiple passes at the same spec is what probably can create more visibility. But how do you do that? I think you do need to give probably an entire sprint across different times. You're kind of planning for the next sprint or the next to next sprint. So
in those different roles that you mentioned, what was your biggest either frustration or challenge? What was the thing that felt like it kept coming back up that you weren't ever able to find a good solution to? What was the thing that got under your skin? You're like, we should be able to do this better, but I can't solve this problem.
In one of the products that I worked, it was just scaling so fast. Things kept breaking. We never kind of solved it, or the visibility was not put in place, that I was constantly surprised that, we are 1 year or 18 months into this product. It's not new anymore. And still stuff like things are going down, or there is an outage for 2 hours. And this is when, you are in the few million ARR kind of range. And this stuff is still happening, and we have customers all over the world. That was kind of frustrating. So it was stuff like, how can stuff keep breaking?
It 0 to a few million ARR and hundreds of customers, thousands of customers in that range?
Yeah, it's hundreds of customers.
Over 12 to 18 months. And so that scaling challenge of getting a system that was stable and predictable and runnable.
It probably, because I think it sometimes the team like to joke that, this was an MVP that just got out, escalated quickly. It just got out of hand, because we just saw like super traction from, and I joined later in that team. but from everything I'd heard is that the traction was just super clean. This is probably not a problem that a lot of teams will face. It's a good problem to have, but
I think
so
a lot of
the
teams
other teams can.
very hard. A lot of teams work very hard to create that problem for themselves.
Right. So yeah, maybe not the right, but yeah, I think it's still a problem in many places. I can't tell you how many places I've been in, like hundreds of 100 people engineering team, or and still things are breaking, and there are specialists for every role, but no one knows actually. It's not that the things are breaking is a problem, is that how come no one knew that the thing was broken for a few days? Is that's I think more frustrating.
Mm-hmm. Have you seen an engineering team go through the transition of during that massive scaling, failure rates, unacceptable, failing in ways that are embarrassing, but get ahead of that curve and to bring the reliability back down or back up, take the failure rate back down?
Yeah, I have, and it usually took. Um, it was a long drawn out process, including maybe some team reshuffling. So some senior members came in, we changed the stack of core components, because the earlier thing was honestly not meant to scale that well. And so we changed the core stack and then switched things out, and we built microservices and let's say a user service, and this is the messaging service or whatever, right? And build those things, and it was built in a completely new stack, and we have to hire new people for it. So we have seen that, but it did take quite a long time.
Mm. Long time in this case is an additional 18 months or something like that?
Yeah, it took almost, let's say we started talking about it now and it happens next year or like a year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because then we realized, oh, there's this massive 3 blocks we need to build, and oh, we have to build it in Scala, and no one knows Scala. So how, like, it starts from there, right?
Yeah, it cascades. It always seems to get bigger. It never seems to get smaller the more you talk about it.
Absolutely.
What do you think is the biggest mistake that most software organizations make?
Apart from the visibility stuff that I talked about is, I'm not sure if that's a software problem. It's probably a software problem because we're all building software businesses. But let's say, how do you know, like your first question is probably the most important one, right? Like, how do you know what to build? And you can try to, I think having frameworks is important. Having frameworks for, okay, this is our metric, and this is how all of these other metrics impact that metric. So everything we do must be impacting one of these metrics in a positive way, so that our final, right, the North Star kind of, keeps going up and to the right. I think working on that is important because then that kind of simplifies conversations. It makes decision making faster, and no one feels that their idea was rejected because, of whatever reason, because there is a clear reasoning. The idea can come from anywhere as long as it impacts these metrics in this way. Mm-hmm. It's good to have. It's never the final solution to the problem, because you can't quantify everything. Just having that can make software teams or software organizations better. And so I think I probably answered your question the other way around. Yeah.
Is there a particular tool that you're excited about right now, or is there a particular tool that you wished every software organization you're a part of adopted?
But apart from the one I'm building?
Oh, of course. Of course that your
product. So my product is is in a way, because I've seen many. It's a tool for simplifying security for developers. So it's a way for developers, because I've been a developer and I didn't really know a lot about security, and I know a lot of the other developers before I got into it face the same problem. But yeah, I think a tool that I really like, because of the whole visibility theme, the theme and observability theme that I've been thinking about a lot, is I think Sentry or tools like that. But for me, that I've been using Sentry for some time, and I think it's absolutely invaluable, because you can put that in and you can move faster, and if something breaks, you kind of come to know, and then you can fix that then, right? Mm-hmm. Also, I think very invaluable. I think especially in the early stage. I think across all stages. In early stage, you want to know because you can move faster, and later stages, you want to know because then you have customers and you want to know as soon as something goes wrong. So yeah, that's one of the tools that I really like.
It was great. Well, thank you very much, Pru. Thank you for joining us today and chatting and telling us about needle.sh. Secure your web apps in 2 lines of code. Excellent.
Just plugging my stuff. Yes. This was great. This was a great experience for me as well. I don't get to, usually I'm talking about product, and don't really end up talking too much about product and engineering and how it kind of fits together. So this was a lot of fun. Thanks, Cam.
Thank you.